Awesome. So let me send a link to our notes. There. And I can share my screen for this bit as well. All right. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Sweet. Move this over here. And we know everyone here, so we can scribble this out. Awesome. Yeah, so we're on meeting number 8 now. Everyone has these links that are here. Not making any new introductions yet. Feel free to rename yourself. So in the previous meeting, which I will link to as well. So yeah, in this previous meeting, we had some good discussions about schema extensions. We continue the discussion about asset handling, which feels like one of the major sticking points that we really need to get right. Z ordering had some discussion, and this question of whether we can potentially appropriate the Z dimension that we would use for a 3D canvas and use that for Z ordering in the case of a 2D canvas. And there's also GLTF as a reference point format. I don't know if anyone here has had a chance to look into it much. I've been meaning to, but it's been a very busy few weeks of travel. Yeah, so that was last week. I think the asset handling is maybe something that we can come back to. But we could start with the stuff that was just brought up. So we have JSON schema definitions and validations. Then we have this question of multiple instances of the same shape. I suspect that second one is something that we're going to have to like really think about. I think that's a really good point that has not been brought up yet. So I think let's start with JSON schemas and validation. Michael, did you bring that one up? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of expand on your thinking then?
Yeah, now we just have some JSON examples on the GitHub in the specs, but I think it would really help if we more formalize that into a JSON schema, so that we can validate. For example, I'm also using our format in my tool for export, so I can validate that export to the schema, for example. And I think it also can help further discussions or to try out some of the things we already talked about. For example, with the assets.
Yeah.
It makes it more maybe more come alive. The spec.
Yeah.
That's that we are only talking about it, that we also try to come up with something already.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It feels like we're at a good point to go and do that. I think if we were to rewind it like a month or so, it probably wouldn't have made much sense because everything was so in flux. But I think the core, at least as we're currently planning to go about this, the core of it feels quite settled. And it would be really interesting to have some schemas there to do some validation and kind of make examples. I think also as a kind of coordinating tool as we try and implement this in different places to build like running software and testers. That's gonna make a lot of sense and make that process easier. Of course, there are other tools for interop for things like TypeScript and things like that we can also leverage. I think JSON schema makes a lot of sense as a kind of source of truth there, just because the ecosystem is so widely supported for conversion into TypeScript types or validation or everything else.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's see. We could do
Also, if you are using all tools than just TypeScript, you probably also can validate the JSON schema, I assume.
say that last one again, sorry.
If you use a different language than TypeScript or JavaScript, then you probably also can validate JSON schema.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's it.
I just noticed that JSON schema even has keywords for the IANA content media types. So these MIME types, that's actually built-in thing of JSON schema. Fits very nicely.
That's
Okay,
that's
nice.
cool. Shall we set and we can talk about who might be able to do this? Is this something that we'd like to do in the kind of next 2-week time frame? I think that makes sense. It's not too much work to take the draft that we have.
Yeah, I might be able to help, I think. I don't have a lot of time, but just to set up a very basic starting point. I think it will already help if we have that, and then we can iterate on that. And would it make sense to then make a pull request on the spec repo?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Okay, great. I think that's going to be.
I don't have experience with JSON schema itself, by the way, but I suppose I will figure it out. I don't know if anybody else here has experience with the JSON schema.
I have some. I've used it before. I think for what we're doing, it's going to be quite straightforward. I remember having a lot of trouble doing more kind of like recursive type definitions and dealing with kind of messy conditional stuff. But that's not really the case for what we're doing. It's quite verbose, but that doesn't really matter for a lot of what we're doing here.
Yeah, it seemed quite straightforward.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Have we got any other thoughts on JSON schemas here? Or validation in general? I feel like this is kind of connected to I'm not quite sure how would you put it? Like it feels like a quite strategic thing to do because it's actually gonna help at a kind of meta level to coordinate and push this stuff forward.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think this will really help us also maybe for others to write an import for the format, for example.
Yeah.
Can use the JSON schema for validation.
Yeah.
Maybe we should also think about like the default file name or file extension, and like the default MIME type we would have a server serve the file with. So I mean, for Markdown, for example, .md is sort of the standard extension, and I don't know, maybe text plus Markdown or something like that is, or text slash Markdown might be the MIME type. So we also need to agree on one MIME type for our format and one file extension.
OC is probably already taken.
Also quickly, I forgot to I can ping the channel just in case anyone relies on that.
We could also say the file type is just JSON. So the extension should be JSON and the file MIME type should be application JSON. It's also valid.
Right.
We just need to state somewhere what the agreed upon way should be.
Yeah. So you've got JSON. We have the option of overloading existing namespaces like Canvas.
And you can even combine it. You can say our extension is .canvas.json. So then the primitive tools know this is a JSON file and opened it in the JSON syntax highlighter. And smarter tools can see, this is actually a Canvas JSON file. This is sometimes done.
Yeah, that's also what TLDraw is doing with Visual Studio Code extension.
Let's see.
So it's really like a third option, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, as has been said already, the most important thing is that we actually agree. And I think in many cases, if you had a different file extension, you'd still be able to pass it into tools, as long as they weren't too strict. You know, if you say like, oh no, this is definitely a Canvas file, don't worry about it, then all of the passing and the rest of it is going to be fine. Are there any other kind of likely choices here? It seems like the MIME types are like similar, right? It could be application/JSON, or it could be, we can have our own Canvas MIME type. I wonder, out of the people here, if there is a sense of what range of, how restrictive MIME types are like across various parts of our computing stack. I've never run into a place where you can't just, you know, have some arbitrary string there. But would there be a reason to not use something custom? Like, is that going to get us into corners?
In the past, I've had issues with Internet Information Server that you needed to add custom MIME types yourself, even well known. But that's a while ago. I don't know if that's still the case.
Probably using application JSON results in the least problems for most users.
Yeah, it is JSON, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense, as the actual way that we're encoding this is JSON, and you'd imagine that well, if if we are incredibly successful, then we could see a kind of a bigger push to have a custom MIME type for this kind of data.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't, I guess, having our own, like we wouldn't actually get many benefits from it, as you still need to have support for that with wherever it's going. So I think, yeah, application / JSON makes a lot of sense there.
And I was I was searching for .canvas extension. It might be taken already by Obsidian.
Yeah. Yeah, they do have that. I mean, hey, Jin. Yeah, Obsidian do have that. I think if we really wanted to go that route and thought that it was appropriate, that isn't necessarily going to be much of an issue. I think the hope is, well, I think more than the hope, the intention is that we're going to kind of see these two specs merge, and come out with one on the other side. Yeah, I mean, we'll need to talk more with the Obsidian folks. I think even before then, we kind of just need to demonstrate some success and gain a bit of trust in kind of us making sensible decisions around this stuff that's going to work for their use case as well. I'm here at the TL Draw offices right now. I know that there's people here that are interested in this effort and that are kind of happy to adopt it as we get to a point where that's possible, which is great, because they're one of the bigger kind of Canvas systems out there. Also on that note, I think in the next 1 or 2 meetings, depending on what comes out of this call, it could be really useful to bring in some people with a background in doing this kind of spec building work. I was thinking specifically of Brooklyn Zelenka, who worked at a company called Fission and did a lot of work on a project called UCAN, and has been doing like a lot of kind of serious work on stuff with this kind of shape. Not Canvas related, but she's got like a really strong technical background and has kind of done some of this. And I happen to know her. There's plenty of other people who have a background there that I don't know who they are, or they're not friends already. So if people have suggestions or connections there for people that would be good to bring in, I think we're getting to a point where it would be appropriate and useful to do that. Like, but before we really start locking things down, doing a kind of expert level vibe check of going through all of our current thinking, why we're thinking that, and hopefully getting some really useful feedback or pushback on specific issues, or pointers to other existing things that we don't know about, and so on. Let me get. I haven't asked, but yeah, I'm just gonna assume that she'll say yes.
Now, what does Brooklyn work on? Just curious.
A project called UCAN is the main one. She's
I also just kind of want to mention I've been trying to connect us with people who have a lot of experience in 3D standards orgs, people working on 3D file formats, Chronos, and folks that are working on the GLTF extensions ecosystem. I've been kind of sharing meetings that happen weekly in another Discord. Haven't really gotten any bites yet, but I can try and attract them here. I just mentioned it, that we're having a meeting now, but I mean, is there a way we could, what should I just try and attract them here and then do a presentation show and tell?
I think that could be good. Yeah. Do you want to expand on the kind of background and links there?
Were you present last meeting? I'm just wondering because I don't want to rehash too much of
With the GLTF.
no, this call because I kind of went through GLTF extensions and the ecosystem, but I can quickly go through it again just in general and who the people are, or just drop some links in the chat.
Yeah, if you want to, I mean, we have some of those links from meeting number 7. Let's see. Let's bring in this working group process at the very least. Yeah, it'd be great if I'm not sure if you're in the board, I can relink it. But if you wanted to add some people involved in that project who might be interested in coming onto one of these calls, I think that'd be great. It's not, what is the capitalization there? It's not all lowercase. That's the
question, Jen.
Yes.
Does GLTF have a JSON schema?
Yes, it is a
Okay.
JSON schema.
Okay. So there is also a JSON schema defined somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'll drop some links and also if I could screen share, I could go through just again quickly what the extensions ecosystem is, because there's a base spec for GLTF, which covers, GLTF's sort of standard implementation, PBR, etc. And then there's a whole extension ecosystem for additional functionality that is optional. And we were kind of discussing this in one of the previous calls because there's many different features and ideas and how to organize them and what to kind of prune and keep. And that's when I mentioned GLTF, like Gary. Yeah, you got it. So yeah, I mentioned, yeah, you're in the right place in terms of the repo. So I would probably go to extensions maybe, or just the main README perhaps would be a good place. But if you go to extensions in terms of the folder,
just one sec. Is there like a main root schema? Is it GLTF? Is that this one?
that's that's the standard implementation of GLTF.
Great.
And you see like extensions used right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how, we kind of can optionally add additional functionality.
Yeah, this is a very good link, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
So there's a template for people proposing an extension. I dropped the markdown file in the chat, and I'm part of a weekly working group in which we work on extensions. And our way of kind of proposing such, we have a 5-stage system where, stage 1 is kind of a high-level proposal for feedback. Stage 2 requires an implementation and valid publicly accessible sample assets and a markdown document explaining the purpose, features, and properties and valid JSON describing it. And then stage 3, a validator implementation and 2 or more implementations of the spec. And I'll link all this in a chat as well. So this is part of a working group where we're working on some GLTF extensions, and one of them is the audio extension for GLTF, which is at which just graduated to being a Chronos extension. You can see the others at different stages and whatnot. and we kind of keep track of what futures in terms of import and export there are currently. So that's kind of our process behind proposing extensions from a sort of a bottom-up organization. And Kronos is all about kind of, it's a bunch of independent people from different companies working to gather consensus and kind of like what we're doing here, essentially. Right now, they're actually at SIGGRAPH doing some different talks over there. But another good link, I would say, is from the GLTF one. Let me I would actually kind of look at GLTF more closely, especially there's one spec which this is where it all kind of clicked in my mind, because one of the most recent proposed extensions is the interactivity one, and it kind of grew from behavior graphs. And last meeting, we were kind of discussing behavior graphs and infinite canvas tools kind of being used for such, and Unity, Unreal Engine, and Blender geometry nodes even, there's now all these implementations of graphs that like I see a whole bunch of overlap with infinite canvas tools. And so, like the way that we kind of can export an infinite canvas to JSON, these behavior graphs as well. Like, so there's like definite interest and overlap from that point of view. And I'll link the extension specifically where some discussion is happening.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it's something that we've talked about before, this question of how much of these kind of more topology-based representations do we want to capture in this spec? I think something like geometry nodes in Blender is a good example of that, where it is very clearly a canvas-based interface. It's also like a kind of very well schematized like node and wire kind of value or expression graph. And yeah, it's an interesting question of do we think that falls into what we're trying to capture? I think
Take a look at that link I just sent at the very bottom. You can also see the spec for interactivity, and also in the link right before the Chronos.org one is their latest PR post about just this spec being kind of released for public comment. And you'll kind of see some examples of behavior graphs. And right now I've been kind of requesting in one of the PRs for some more sample assets so that we could more easily kind of give feedback and play around with it. It's not the best example of a proposed extension because compared to other kind of proposed extensions, I feel like it's missing things. Like if you go back to that tab you were just on, you see how it only has a make file and a specification? That feels a bit too premature for me. If you look at some of these other extensions, you'll see a whole bunch more. You'll see a schema and you'll see like sample assets in some of them, figure schema, so they should also kind of include sample assets in a repo.
I think it's a
Yeah.
very good idea to look closely what the Kronos group did here, because they faced very similar problems, like exporting a graph, nodes, and positions. And if it's not possible to export their structures into Open Canvas, then we did something wrong, because we should be something like a superset.
Yeah.
This will
So-
bridge the Canvas world and the whole 3D graphics world together as well. And I would love to see that because I see these tools being like the ultimate sort of collaboration platforms. So it'd be awesome to see like, you know, people from working on different engines being able to collaborate with these tools.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One thing that this brings up, and I think this is actually a relatively minor decision in just kind of how we're structuring the base extension, the kind of like base types and things like that, is that this feels like a kind of argument to have less kind of built-in types, while still showing the kind of basic structure of the format. Because if you're doing something like Blender's geometry nodes, there's a good chance that you actually don't want people to be able to represent rectangles and other stuff, which that could just as well be you know, enforced by just not exposing the ability for people to make those shapes in the system. And I guess actually maybe I'm immediately backtracking that statement, because I think part of the point there would be that Blender would have those restrictions, but then someone else could still annotate the same file in Excalibur or something, and have that still work in
Isn't the most minimal basically edges and nodes like a mind map?
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
guess position would be kind of another step for, you know, how they relate to each other. I think that's important information in terms of the context of where things are on the map, because edges and nodes, you know, they can be free forming, just like a force directed graph. Maybe that's too minimal. Um, but yeah, and I think last call we also took inspiration from this in terms of how important it is to have a validator. And I tried to fork the website and saw that the graph on the JSON canvas .org website is hard coded in. We should turn it into more of a GLTF sort of validator website where you can import and export a base implementation.
That's a great point. Me and Jess were talking about this quite a lot over the last couple of weeks. So I want to try and get back to this question of instances of the same shape, but before we wrap up this call, but just before then, let me kind of sketch out some things that we had in mind, not as like real UI, but just in terms of what we were thinking about. So the idea came up that, well, like what we could do would be we'd have some tabs up at the top. We'd be able to see a canvas within that, and you know, hook up some stuff with some arrows, switch between tabs or have multiple tabs up, and then show the already the
That's perfect, I would say.
we'd have a little window showing the kind of textual representation, or maybe I should just say something like that, and then you know, imagine that that's perfectly schematized JSON in there. I'll make it monospace, then it's legitimate.
And is then the idea to have the Excalibur and TLDraw be functioning instances of the apps?
Yeah, to be
Nice.
functioning instances and to be synced in the browser, so we can kind of demonstrate client interrupt there. But the reason I bring this up now, because what you just said made me realize that this should absolutely include like an upload somewhere, right? So this would be JSON, and again, this is not any kind of real layout, but let's just do something like that. So being able to upload a file in this format, see its textual representation, as well as run it through the the JSON schema validation process, so you get quite good errors. That's one of the nice things about JSON schema is its error reporting is really pretty good compared to other stuff in that category. Yeah, I think we could also make this textual representation editable. So it's really another client in a sense. So it would be mostly a demonstration, but also a way to help kind of test changes to the spec and stuff like that. Yeah, this is what me and Jess have been thinking about over the last few weeks. I'm not sure if there are any thoughts on the utility of doing this other than it being a cool demo of real-time sync.
It's more than just a cool demo. I feel like it's ground truth. And I think you got all the basic requirements there. That's if you move like one of those rectangles, if it can get represented in a JSON, what you see is what you get. It's good.
Yeah.
Sure.
Also, if those changes propagate to the other tabs.
Yeah, absolutely. You mean other tabs on this page, not other browser tabs?
Correct. Yeah. Like if you move a rectangle of the TL draw, you can also see and help you debug kind of any issues, because I recall there was like some rotation origin issue one point.
Yeah, that's still an issue. There's a bit of Excalibur stuff that I would love to go and figure out. It's also weirdly a good test of how thorough the documentation is for all these different tools. I found some gaps in the TL draw docs trying to get sync working, and I imagine it'll be the same as we try and build demos here.
I just want to mention that I know it's late in the meeting, but Indy and Aaron, who just joined the call, are from OMI, and very knowledgeable on the whole extension ecosystem and GLTF ecosystem standards, orgs, how they work. So maybe at the very end, if there's water cooler time or next meeting, we could have a discussion if there's any more questions or interest in how it all works.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we have some time left. We have another item from this meeting's agenda, but we could at the very least start with unscratching this introduction section. And Aaron and what was it, Indy? Maybe Aaron, do you wanna are you up for giving us a 2-minute intro of who you are and what brought you here?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Aaron. I contribute to OMI and also to Godot Engine, mostly on GLTF extensions. And my goal here is to increase interoperability between different like 3D content platforms, whether that be game engines or games or Blender or whatever. And GLTF extensions are a great way to do this because GLTF is a really nice open standard. And I haven't looked into Open Canvas much, but I've heard great things about it from Jin. And if you're doing a JSON-based format, I see no reason to not just do a similar extension thing to what GLTF is doing to allow people to add in new functionality. In fact, I might even personally be interested in implementing Open Canvas inside of Godot Engine and like importing and exporting like 2D scenes so that you can take like a 2D game and kind of export the level into another game engine. And if there's an extension system, then we could build extensions on top of Open Canvas to add new functionality. So you could, for example, export a physics object in 2D into that Open Canvas scene, and then you could take that to any game engine that supports that format, and it can, if it supports that extension, it could import it and then have the physics data ready to go, and you just like hit play on the game and it runs.
Yeah, that would be incredibly cool, I think. Yeah, it's been one of the largest points of discussion in this group is kind of how do we get extensions right? They're one of the most consequential things to get wrong, I think. If we have kind of bad extension mechanisms, then we're like really shooting ourselves in the foot, and it's much harder to fix that later. It's great to see the work that's gone into GLTF as a kind of point of reference there, because that's obviously fairly widely used.
Just
Yeah.
as like a brief overview of like how the extensions work is that in all of the JSON schemas for the base GLTF format, they have defined as a field called extensions. And that is defined to contain just arbitrary JSON data with keys as of strings with reserved prefixes and values as JSON objects. And then you can whatever goes in those JSON objects is specified by the extension. And then the extensions, the name is like reserved. So there's like, so for example, there's like an OMI prefix for Godot. So it's like OMI underscore something. And that way there's not name clashes between different extension authors. And then once you have like a name for the extension, you have to have a markdown document that says what values can be put in that JSON and how they're supposed to be interpreted. And there's usually included with that schemas and example files so that you can verify that your implementation is correct.
Yeah. How very roughly speaking, how many extensions are there in that ecosystem, and how's that been?
So worth mentioning here that the GLTF ecosystem is quite new from a long-term perspective. The GLTF 2 was only really started to be a thing in like 2018. So most of the extensions so far are material extensions just for the visuals, but we're getting to some more fancy ones like physics and audio in the past year or two. But in terms of the total quantity of extension, there's a few dozen extensions available already.
And how has the mechanism there been like in terms of its ability to coordinate people around those extensions? Has it felt like a good setup?
The level of coordination varies based on like how many people are interested in an extension and what companies and organizations you can get interested in it. And implementing support for every extension ever is like a lot. So some organizations like specifically limit what they choose to support. I have spoken to people both from Unreal Engine and Blender, and they specifically said that they're only interested in implementing ratified, finalized Chronos extensions. So like not third-party ones, but third-party ones can be used. And if they get popular, then it would make sense to implement them, even if like they had a rule of only like the official ones or whatever. So Open Canvas working group could create a list of extensions that use like maybe OCWG prefix or something like that. And that could be like the set of official extensions that are like endorsed by the group. And anybody implementing a format is encouraged to implement those. And also notes that with GLTF, there's the concept of extensions used versus extensions required. So you can basically mark as an extension as required or not. If it's not required, then you could just load it without the extension if you don't support it. But if it is required, then the implementation is supposed to stop trying to load that file if it doesn't have the extension. So that way, for example, if you have an extension that's implementing like a new image format or something, well, maybe you don't want to even try to load this file if you can't view the image that's stored in it. So you just want to stop loading at that point and show an error to the user.
That's interesting. And how does it deal with schema mismatches between different systems. If you have systems A and B, and A supports, you know, extensions 1, 2, 3, and system B has extensions like 2, 3, 4. If you're passing data between the two,
The answer is that if you export from system A, then the file may have extensions 1, 2, 3, and then when it gets imported into system B, it would only be able to import 2 and 3 because there's no support for there's no 4 in the file and there's no 1 in the app.
if you were to do a round trip, is that data preserved or is that dropped at the point of importing it?
The data is ideally preserved and supports round tripping. When I've been designing standards, I've been keeping this in mind, and I've been adding both import and export support for Godot engine. So for example, you can export physics from Godot in addition to importing them into Godot. But it's not required. But ideally, you can round trip the data. But there may be data loss in some cases because the standard has to be something that's like generally agreed upon by many different implementations of the format. So all the different implementers of Open Canvas Working Group ideally should take a look at how that will be implemented in their engine or app of choice and see if that's like feasible to do, and agree on some set of parameters that could be standardized.
That's great. Just as I saw we're running out of time, Indy, do you wanna introduce yourself? Just so we have you here, and then I'll stop talking and open it up to the rest of the group here. You also don't have to if you don't want to.
Hi, I'm Indy Bio. Real world name is Bernal with an unpronounceable surname. I'm passionate about the metaverse because of this interconnectionness. I'm an academic and a researcher, and frustrated by the complexity of data and our inability to publish it in anything other than boring text. So I think my passions coincide with Jin's and how to visualize it. And then I also want to maintain the citations and the references. So I love using Obsidian, and I think you guys are related to Obsidian. And so having that sort of canvas tools on top of that. So I'm not an IT technical person. I'm a co-chair of the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group, where I just try and help wherever I can. And yeah, Jen also pulled me, so just keen to learn.
Awesome. Could you just say or spell your name there, just so I can check it in our notes?
I'll pop it in the chat.
Sure.
So as to finish up that thought, round tripping is ideal, but not like guaranteed at all, because the implementation's data may be different from what gets stored in the file.
Right. And I mean, in any case, as is the same with this system here, round tripping relies on certain things being assured by each of the systems, right? If any step in that chain screws something up, then it's going to break it. I don't see any way around that. Not if they have full control over the data, which they probably need to.
Yeah.
All right, we got 5 minutes left. I'm going to stop asking questions, but I want to open it up to Steve and Max and Michael. Yeah, any questions?
I had a question. When we say extensions, I'm trying to think, what is that? What's an example of an extension that we would have? Is it going to be a rectangle, an arrow? That's my question.
So the way that we've been talking about extensions so far has been schema extensions. I'm not sure if the notions between GLTF and what we've been talking about the notions of extensions, like whether they're exactly equivalent. But in our case, it would be something like you have a you have a rectangle that has width and height and maybe text or something. Like you have some base schema, and then you could extend it with, you know, edge thickness and corner radius, and or you could extend it with like physics properties like mass or other things. So you would take base schemas, which could just be like the most base schema, and you would extend that with additional or modified properties.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Steve. What exactly is an extension in our context? So we have these base types, and in GLTF, they are probably already the extensions. But now we have these base types which we extend with extensions. So it's similar yet different. So, and maybe collecting some more examples for extensions would help to shape our view. What about like arrows that automatically reroute when you use them? That would be an extension to a normal arrow. Then what about embedded? What about an ASCII cinema player as a media format? Would that be an extension, or is it merely a loaded asset? I think it's just an asset type loaded into an item, so it's not an extension. So then we need to maybe clean up our wording. What do we have? We have item types and extensions of item types. Do we also have relation types? Do we have extensions of relation types? So what we should clean up that language a little bit before we can formalize it as a JSON schema, actually.
Yeah, I was thinking, what do we make extendable? Is the schema itself on the root level extendable? Or just the...
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, but if an application needs to store data at root level.
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
GLTF, the extensions can live kind of at any level. So you can put an extension at the root of the document, or you could put it on a node or on a material, or really anything can be extended. You just add, it's all JSON. So you would just add a key extensions and then add the stuff under it.
So it's more like aspect-oriented programming on data. You just can enhance everything, any property bag, any object.
Yeah, because it's hard to say like what, like in advance what would make sense to put the data. So we just allow the data to go anywhere.
It sounds like before we were saying that we're going to have an open canvas working group rectangle, and it's going to have these properties. And then when we export from a different tool, it's going to inherit those properties. We're going to have this whole inheritance tree starting at that. But extensions are a different method of doing the same thing.
So let me give an example of an extension that we could have for Open Canvas. So I'm going to make the assumption that Open Canvas doesn't have audio inside of it. So imagine that we have some kind of audio extension that puts audio in the canvas. And that audio would be like loudest if you're viewing that part of the canvas with your camera. Maybe if the camera's to the left of there, you would hear the audio coming out of the right ear. And so there'd be like this kind of localized audio inside of the canvas. And maybe another extension could like control how that is played back or something, where like you can click on something in the canvas and it will like pause and play the audio.
Yeah, there's a couple points here. I'm also aware we are at time, but very quickly on the extension front, I feel like the direction that we've been converging towards is that like really everything is an extension. So like all the OCWG stuff are really just, here's a set of primitives that we encourage implementing so that we have some like shared base of objects that you can work with, but they would still be extensions of the most basic things. We've had the idea come up, I'll get these down the notes after the call, the idea come up of having extensions at any level, which I think is really interesting and gets around some of the questions of having to make the correct decisions upfront or ahead of time, which could be really nice. And then from what you were just saying, Jen, the other thing that comes up here is how we're thinking about this format. We've been mostly thinking about it as a kind of like a knowledge representation format where we're trying to capture like a mix of specific kind of spatial, almost visual information, but also a lot of kind of semantic content, like the structure of nodes and their relationships and that kind of stuff. Your example was interesting because that's like you are defining a kind of an expected way that the interface should work there, like with audio changing as you navigate. I don't have thoughts, but that's a provocative idea. All right, we're at time, so I'll stop the recording now. But if people have, actually, I won't stop the recording just yet. If people want to hang around for another couple minutes and there are more questions floating around, happy to do that. But we can wrap up here. Max?
Yeah, we could talk briefly about the second agenda item to have multiple instances of the same item, because I have no idea of, maybe we can learn from GLTF how they support it or not support it. Let's say you have some item on the map and it's also represented on a second space in the same canvas, but it's the same item. If you change one, the other one is changed. Does that exist in GLTF?
What was the question?
If you have an item, let's say a rectangle with text, you can maybe place it on several places on the same canvas. I'm aware of one tool that does this. So if you edit one rectangle and change the text, the other one is also changed. So it's more or less like a mirror item or two instances of the same item. So it's two locations, but one content. Does a similar thing exist in GLTF?
Kinda. There's ways of doing it, but not officially per se. Like we kind of move the file around. But synchronizing it in real time is something that that's a very interesting idea, and there's been plugins for doing that kind of real time sort of thing. Like I know
I don't mean synchronizing between different files, but between different items in one file.
What you would
Like
do
the
in
robot has two
GLTF,
arms.
what you would do in GLTF is anything that is expected to be shared between multiple places gets put into a top level resource, and then that resource is used. So for example, you can have a mesh in GLTF, and you could have 2 or 10 instances of that mesh. And maybe you could have a light, and the light has a top level resource as well. So if you were to change the color of that light, it would change that on all the lights. Similarly, you could have maybe a rectangle referencing some top level text resource or visual properties resource of some kind. And then if you change that resource, it will change all instances of it.
Perfect.
So the question is like, if you want, this is a question of how you design Open Canvas is what things you want to put directly on the object and what things you want to put on a resource. So if the JSON of the object just like contains all the data, then that's only for that object. But maybe instead the JSON for that object contains some index number that points to an index in some top level array of resources.
Yeah, so the essential thing is to separate resources, or we call them maybe assets, from the items. And then if the items can reference the asset resources, then we get the same functionality.
Yeah, exactly. And you can call it whatever you want. I don't think GLTF actually has an official name for these. Godot calls them resources, so that's what I'm calling them. But assets works fine too. It's just some piece of data that's reusable and shareable between other elements in the same file.
Yeah, very good explanation. I think it fits our current thinking quite nicely if we have an item reference an asset by ID, not just by inclusion.
Right. Yeah, and
It
But we
reminds
don't
me
have
of-
that yet, so we need to discuss whether we want to add that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the SVG has a
Yeah.
section, and then anything can reference and inherit the properties from it, but it might be in a different location with a different brushstroke.
Yeah. One important thing that we'll have to settle there is that the expected behavior around mutating that stuff is really clear. I think what we're saying is that if you have I don't know, a rectangle with a color, right? And you have multiple instances that are putting that data somewhere, that color somewhere, that if you change the color somewhere, it's going to be the same everywhere. Like we have to think through like what are the expected semantics of those kinds of changes. And I feel like there's almost two questions in here because there's something like videos and assets that we've been talking about a lot of, like sharing something like video data. But then multiple instances of a shape is introducing like maybe new semantics to this. I think there's a bunch of interesting stuff there. I'm gonna stop the recording now because we're over time. Aaron and Benel, super great to have you join. I feel like there's a lot of interesting overlap with GLTF, and I think it would be great to continue that overlap so we can kind of both push things in good directions. And yeah, let me hit the button. Where is it? It's here.